It was a rough life. Ride, 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 and ride. Hilton Smith, pitcher. We played in a rough league. We had a number of really unsavory characters like Charleston or Judd Wilson to contend with, as well as pitchers who didn't have a problem throwing at us, but that was something we had accepted as part of the game. I think what made our time a bit harder than most is what we had to deal with in addition to that. White fans would call us names and throw stuff at us on the field, and we couldn't say a word. In some places we traveled to, we couldn't get a glass of water to drink, even if we had the money to pay for it. And back then, water was free. We did an awful lot of traveling, mostly in buses. They were nice buses to begin with, but they weren't the kind that were made for riding every day. We ran those poor buses ragged. Many a time we'd ride all day and night and arrive just in time to play a game. Then we'd get back on that hot bus and travel to the next town for another game, often without being able to take a bath. I gotta say, that cramped bus would get pretty ripe on some of those summer nights after a doubleheader. Phew! This was all season long. All of that traveling would wear on you. Many times the only sleep we got was on the bus. But that could be hard because we had to take the back roads to get to some of those little towns, and they were so bumpy they'd have us bouncing around the bus like popcorn on a hot stove. Fastest we could go was about 35 to 40 miles an hour. If the driver got sleepy, a couple of the guys on the team would take turns driving the bus. To pass the time, we played cards or sang old Negro spirituals or barbershop numbers. Just about every team had a quartet. They'd be our entertainment for most of the way. Some guys could really sing. Most people don't know it, but Satchel Paige had a wonderful singing voice, and so did Buck Leonard. We would listen to them and try to join in. Traveling was even rougher down south. They didn't take too kindly to black folks down there, especially if you were from up north. We would have to travel several hundred miles without stopping because we couldn't find a place where we could eat along the way. It's a hurtful thing when you're starving and have a pocket full of money, but can't find a place to eat because they don't serve Negroes. And you could forget about trying to use the restroom in those places. You would just have to hold it, or stop the bus and do your business in the woods. We had to get used to it. After a while, we learned which places we could stop at and which ones we couldn't. They didn't have any fast food places back then. Many times we wouldn't get food to eat before a game, and if we did, it usually wasn't much. We would have to play a doubleheader on only 2 hot dogs and a soda pop. If we couldn't buy food from a restaurant or a hot dog stand, we'd stop at a grocery store and get some sandwiches or sardines and crackers. Sometimes those grocery store clerks didn't want to serve us either. One time, a store clerk told us to put our money in an ashtray if we wanted to buy something. He grabbed the money out of the ashtray and put the change back in it. He didn't want to touch our hands, but he sure did touch that money. I guess he had to draw the line somewhere. Just didn't make any sense. It was segregated in the North, too. They wouldn't serve us inside a restaurant, so we had to get our food from the back door and eat on the bus. We'd send one guy to buy food for the whole team. Hotels were segregated, too. Many times we would get to a town after riding all day, only to spend a few more hours searching for a place to stay. The minute we arrived, inexplicably, every hotel would be full. If we couldn't find any place to stay, we would have to sleep on the bus. Some of the smaller clubs slept crammed in their cars or even in the ballpark because they couldn't afford to stay in a hotel. Some teams slept at the YMCA, the local jail, even in funeral homes. In cities, we stayed in Negro hotels or Negro rooming houses. We slept 2, 3 guys to a bed. That's all the team owner could afford. A number of the Negro hotels were very clean and neat, but more than a few times we'd run into those places, and I won't call out any names, that had so many bed bugs you'd have to put a newspaper between the mattress and the sheets. And then in other places, we had to sleep with the lights on because the bed bugs would crawl all over you when the lights were out. Can't sleep with a bug on your leg. I don't care how tough you are. In small towns, we stay with local families. During the game, the manager would send someone to find people who would put us up for the night. By the time the game was over, we all had places to stay. Sometimes the colored church would fix us a meal, and I tell you, that was some good eating. If we got to a town and we had a little time to kill, we'd go fishing or catch a movie. Back then, a movie ticket only cost about 25 cents, and you could stay in the theater all day if you wanted to. We had to go through the back entrance, though, because they only allowed Negroes to sit in the balcony. There would usually be 3 levels in the theater, and the white audience would sit at the bottom. That whole middle section would be empty, as if the owners wanted us to be as far away from the white audience as possible. That kind of thing seems silly today, but that's how it was back then. We played about 80 to 120 games during the regular season. The major league teams played about 154. The rest of the time, we would barnstorm, which basically means that we played just about anybody and everybody who wanted to play a game, whenever and wherever we could get one. We barnstormed against professional and semi-pro teams all over the North, South, West, and the Midwest. Sometimes we played 2, 3, even 4 games in one day. For league games, we charged $1 for the bleachers, $2 for the grandstand, and $2.50 for box seats. But in those little towns, the admission was just 50 or 75 cents, and 25 cents for kids. We would average about $15 or $20 per player per game. That wasn't bad money. In those days, you could do a lot more with a quarter than you can these days with $1. On some of those barnstorming trips, the smaller ball clubs slept on the side of the road in tents and had to catch their own food. The competition wasn't always very good in those little towns either, but we had to be careful not to run the score up so high that we wouldn't be invited back. On one occasion, Buck Leonard and his team couldn't play after they had traveled all day to get to this little town. When they got to the ballpark, they found out the Ku Klux Klan was marching there that night. They got back on the bus and blew out of there. I tell you what, back then, when the Klan was marching, Negroes went inside, turned out the lights, and pulled out a Bible. Barnstorming through the South was nice at times. When we played in small black towns, people always treated it like it was a special occasion. For them, it was a big deal when a Negro League team came to town. It was like a family reunion. They would barbecue and play music. We had a grand old time. After the game, we'd go eat some of that good food and hang out with those nice folks before we had to jump on the bus again. It was in those towns that we'd find a lot of new ball players, too. They'd be playing wearing some old heavy shoes and raggedy uniforms. But many of those kids could throw like the devil and hit the ball a country mile. If they looked good enough, we'd bring them along with us. Had to make sure it was okay with their folks first, of course. We would also find new recruits when we played Negro college teams. In fact, that's where we found many of our rookie ball players. A good number of the guys in our league were college educated. We played on some of the worst fields you could imagine. Once in a while, we'd play in a small town where they had just made the ball field the same day we got there. Some old pasture. You had to pray the ball wouldn't land in some cow stuff. Some were so patchy, grass here, dirt there. Some didn't even have grass. And some were hard as a rock, with pebbles all over the place. You were always worried about the ball taking bad hops. Can't get to be a great fielder in those conditions. A few of our big Negro teams had their own parks, but most teams rented the big league ballparks when the major league teams were away. Those big league teams made good money renting their parks to us. But don't you know that after paying them all of that money to play in their ballpark, we still had to suit up down the street at the local YMCA or someplace else because they didn't let us use the locker rooms. Makes you mad to hear players today squawk about jet lag and all of this. Try sleeping in a car with your knees to your chest, crammed with 8 other guys, only to play a game the next day. Players today just don't know how bad it could be. We look back and wonder, how did we do all of that? It's simple. We love the game so much, we just look past everything else. We were ball players. There was nothing we would rather spend our time doing.